I have just had the great privilege of offering an address for the Martin Luther King Assembly at Greens Farms Academy. It's been a real pleasure, and now I'm here to talk with Eliza and Ethan a little bit more about Dr. King, perhaps, or whatever it is that Ethan wants to ask me about.
Okay, so I guess we'll get started. If, to start off, maybe some people watching haven't heard this speech for whatever reason, so could you summarize sort of what message that you wanted to leave the listeners with?
Well, I referred back to my own experience as a young child in 1957 in Little Rock, Arkansas, when Central High School was first integrated. It was a very tense time in the South. It was the first time that that an attempt at racial integration had been attempted in any of the Southern schools. The Brown versus Board of Education ruling of the Supreme Court had happened in 1954, outlawing segregation, but no one had really tested it. In 1957, it was decided it would be tested in Little Rock. I was a child at that time, and it made a distinct impression on me. Really, it was a sea change for all the white people who opposed or supported integration. I was very fortunate. My parents supported integration, but not all our neighbors did. And I began to learn even at that early age that to stand up for something that was right was sometimes difficult to do and could cause people to have problems. I went on then as a teenager to get involved in the civil rights movement, to join with others who were about your age, to visit black churches, to march. I had to get a police escort out of Mississippi 2 different times because our bus was being pelted with rocks. I was traveling with a singing group when I was a teenager, and there were 3 black students with us. And in those days, as odd as it will seem to you, black students and white students couldn't be on the same bus without getting pelted with rocks. And so it was a very difficult time, but for me a very formative time, and I think is what really led me into a life of service as an Episcopal priest.
What part do you think, like, education in schools will play in becoming more tolerant and having a global sort of mindset?
Well, so much of it, that's a good question, Ethan. So much of it has to do with simply raising one's awareness. When I was your age, we didn't talk about prejudice and intolerance in school. We didn't talk about the importance of welcoming others. We didn't have any Hindu people or African American people. When in my school, I went to a high school of 2,700 students, and there were 3 black students in that school. There were 2 Jewish students in that school. So we weren't asking those questions. Nowadays, as we've become more kind of mixed up and begun to think more about what that means, and the fact that intolerance is something that continues even though we're more integrated now. I think that in itself does a lot to change people's lives. I think the point I really most wanted to make in my address today was that as we look back at that time, and it's important to recognize the real danger Dr. King and others faced in those days, but also it's important to realize that prejudice and intolerance it continues in our own time. It was not defeated with the civil rights movement. We've made progress, but it's an issue that is still prevalent in our day, unfortunately. So I just hoped that the students would maybe think a little bit about how they might contribute to eradicating intolerance in their own generation.
Thank you so much for coming to our school and talking with us.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for listening. Check out one of our news updates coming later this week or next week.